Hi, I'm Nate Case, and we're going to talk about incident response. This is kind of our intro to incident response talk. We did an incident response workshop yesterday. We just did threat detection, and we're going to kind of jump in from there. Are we going to get questions from the last? Or are we going to skip that? Okay, cool. We're going to skip that. All right, so, excuse me, this is incident response. Now, we did just have an incident response workshop yesterday, so there's folks in the audience here that I'm going to ask questions of as we get going because it's just kind of fun. Figure out how much we actually taught you yesterday is really part of my job here, frankly. Did you learn anything? How are we doing? This is going to be a little bit remedial from what we did yesterday, so hopefully you guys picked it up and we can keep going. All right. So today we're going to talk about different types of incidents. We're going to talk about different types of responses and event management in SIRS. So who knows the word SIRS? S-I-R-S. A couple of us from yesterday. Anybody new know the word SIRS that wasn't here yesterday? Security Incident Response Simulation. So what does that sound like? Sounds kind of like a game, right? So we have a couple of different types of that, and we'll get into that in a minute. But one of the most important things we're going to go over today is making sure that you actually get into SIRS and play them internally and feel empowered to do so. So goals. I want you guys, besides the 5 on the board here, I want you guys to think about incident response and address incident response without being afraid of it. I don't want it to be something that is scary. I don't want it to be something that you need to worry about and not sleep at night. I think that's the worst possible answer here. Incident response is something that everybody has to deal with. It's going to happen. Somebody's going to make a mistake. So when we talk about this type of stuff, we're going to deal with a couple of concepts here, internal and external threat. So we're going to talk about external threat. We all know about external threat. I'm not going to go into what it is. What's an internal threat? What internal threat am I looking at right now? People, because we make mistakes. Wish we didn't, but we do. So as we think about incident response, I want you to consider insider threat and consider yourself as the threat. It's something that you're going to get more opportunity to respond to, frankly, and it's something that's a little easier to deal with. Right? We all make mistakes. It's cool, not a big deal, and frankly, it's not even a scary thing. So I used to be an administrator back in the days of Windows 2000. Who remembers the great little pop-up box when you wanted to log off the terminal server portion of Windows 2000? Where was the reboot button? Or it was the shutdown button, wasn't it? It was log off and shutdown, right? And they were right next to each other, and if you've been working since like 4 in the morning, the first thing you did is hit the shutdown button accidentally, right? That's an incident. So let's do incident response for that. Okay? All right. So definitions. Whoa. Apparently I've got a very loud voice all of a sudden. Incident response is an organized approach. What do you think the key words here are in this wonderful paragraph? We talked about them last time. Organized. Why is it an organized approach? Who do we not want doing incident response for us? Okay, yeah. The response from the audience was hackers. To be fair, they make some of the best incident responders. They don't tend to notify. And the reality of the notify part is really the issue here. Incident response needs to be organized. And by organized, I mean no cowboys and no heroes. Cowgirls either. Right? It's not okay. To do incident response correctly, you need to make sure that you track what you do. You need to communicate what you do. And you need to have everybody able to see it. So if you're the hero, and you go fix something and you don't tell anybody what you did, and it happens again tomorrow, and you're sick, what's going to happen? Meh, nothing. Right? That's the problem. If you do something or you mean to do something and you don't tell anybody else about it, and they say, hey, look, I've got this person affecting an instance and they're adding ENIs and security groups to it, and I don't know that you're doing it, what am I going to think that's going on right now? I'm going to think a hacker is messing with my instance. Right? Not okay. So you have to make sure you communicate what you're doing. So in general, as we look at this, there are some things that principles that you're going to use as you begin to make these mental adjustments to what's going on. I need to establish goals. So I need to pick a target outcome. Now initially, when I start my incident response, what's that going to be? pretty low, right? I'm not going to say, I'm going to fix the incident, and that's the first step I'm going to take. I'm going to figure out what's wrong first, right? I'm going to try to establish control. I'm going to look into what might be going on, right? Next, I want to respond using the cloud. Why do I want to respond using the cloud versus respond using my data center or my laptop? What does the cloud have that my data center and my laptop do not have? Elastic scale, right? So I used to help build data centers, and it was a lot of fun. I actually enjoyed the hell out of it. But all of that said, I used to have to run a separate Splunk cluster just for doing incident response. And that Splunk cluster had Fiber Channel, it had a SAN, it had networks, it had major security on it because obviously you can't just let anybody play with it. And it cost both in monetary value for the SAN, the Fiber Channel, the licenses for Splunk, but it also cost me floor space because if you own a data center, you run a data center, I pay pretty much by the square foot. It really is kind of a real estate business, right? So as we look at this, doing incident response in the cloud allows me to scale to the incident, scale up and scale down. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this that I will tell you, kind of sort of in the last talk, can be automated. So you may well want to spin up your tool set when an incident occurs and spin it down after it's done. Do things at scale. Who here has an enterprise or is part of an enterprise? A few of us? How many servers do you have? Thousands, the man says. Thousands. How do I respond to an incident on thousands of servers? Organize them. True. I'm going to use tags. Absolutely. What else am I going to do? If I need to type this command into each of those servers, what am I going to do that with? Type fast, the man says. Fail. I win as the hacker. Say again? Python is a wonderful answer, but it's still relatively slow. Systems manager is the answer. If I had something to give you, I would give you something. I am out of socks. Sorry. You've already got socks. You're wearing them. So yes, I'm going to use Systems Manager because I can use Systems Manager on a whole load of servers all at the same time and limit them by tags and get done what I need to get done immediately. Right? I love that answer. I am going to do things at scale. I'm going to do things at scale every time because I don't want to type everything all the time. What else does Systems Manager give us? If I do things at scale, what else do I have to do if I, like the very nice gentleman over here said, start typing it into each command line? What am I not getting out of that? I'm not getting any logs, right? Potentially. Now, if I do it in Systems Manager, all of those commands go into CloudTrail. And I can get all of those commands into an S3 bucket. So I have the response from the command and I have the command. So as an incident responder, that makes my job of having to track what I've done a lot smaller. And I can move a lot faster. So when we say redeployment mechanisms, what does that mean to anybody? Does anybody get that statement? A couple of us? Go ahead, sir. Okay. Yep. Okay. That's fair. So the very nice gentleman's response is that I don't use Systems Manager, but I do use CloudFormation. Can I do it that way? So that's kind of what this redeployment concept is, right? I can use CloudFormation to go ahead and deploy a whole new environment in a new region if I want to, using stacks, right? Beyond that, we just released the ability to figure out if something has changed. So I can go ahead, if I've deployed my entire infrastructure with CloudFormation, I can click, hey, is there any difference? And get that diff up on the screen. So that's a really nice ability. To be fair, totally cool, love it. If I'm going to do this, the intent of this statement was to use DevSecOps. So I'm having my developers build stuff in an account. I'm having that code that is both infrastructure and application reviewed at the software level. Do we have internet gateways that we shouldn't have? Do we have security groups that have 000 in them? Do we have IAM principles with EC2.star or other silly things in them? Here, and then I'm going to head and build that environment. I'm going to dynamically test it and evaluate whether it's a good environment or not with whatever testing system that you have. And then I'm going to take that final artifact, and I'm going to push that over to my production pipeline and deploy it to production where there are no humans, right? And at that point, if I have to break glass and deal with that environment, I know that everything in that environment can be checked with CloudFormation and use a diff and evaluate where we're at. And if there are any diffs, yeah, that's a problem.
In that context, the diff applies cross accounts?
So the diff is going to look at the CloudFormation. So the question is, does diff apply cross accounts? And the answer is no. I think you misunderstood. CloudFormation is going to look at the CloudFormation implementation in that account and evaluate whether it has changed or not. So if I have a production account, I'm going to deploy my application into the production account, and then I can have the ability to diff that with current to when it was deployed. Is it different or not? Right. Okay. I'm going to iterate to avoid the mundane. Why? Because nobody likes to test, nobody likes to type stuff. I want to have an automated library that I can just use. We talked about it a little bit in the remediation portion, but this is where you guys sit down and build out a whole SSM library that builds out all of the things that you need to do to forensics, and it may build out the automatic deployment of the CloudFormation like we talked about. It might do the automatic diff that we talked about. It might use config to evaluate, for instance, are we still CIS compliant? Are we still meeting the benchmarks? Right? There's a lot of things that we can do there that we need to do here, because I don't want to have the very nice gentleman here look through each and every last little line of my entire configuration to make sure it's kosher. Right? That's no good. Nobody wants to do that. Learn and improve your process. Finally, it's going to happen. Something's going to happen. Somebody's going to delete something. Someone's going to cause an incident that you need to respond to. Instead of being afraid of it, embrace it and learn from it. Every time this happens, it's something that you can take, appropriately review it, and go, hey, look, we made a mistake. Guess what? We can learn, and we can get it better next time. It won't happen again, right? Mr. Vogels likes to say that we plan for failure, and we do. We prep for the worst possible scenario, and we build to that. Why? Because it's going to happen eventually. So do that. Now, in the life cycle, we're going to look at establishing control. We're going to determine what has been broken. We're going to recover if we need to. We're going to look at the root cause, and then we're going to improve. Kind of what we just talked about in a very concise, circular manner. This is totally just a simplification so you can look at this diagram and know where you are in the process, right? So as we look at this and we're going to establish control, oh no, we have an incident. What are we going to do first? What's going to happen? We're going to evaluate whether this incident is really an incident or not, right? So actually it wasn't, by the way. This incident over here is actually the incident. And that's kind of the point. If we're looking at what's going on here, right, and we're establishing control, hey look, it wasn't actually an incident. We had control, no big deal, right? But we might find something else that's out there. So we need to look a little bit closer. What are we going to look at? So we're going to start looking at these things out here that tell us what's going on inside this incident so that we can figure out whether or not we can establish control and what's happening. So we talked about logs and monitoring last talk. Does anybody remember the 3 things that guard duty looks at? VPC flows, DNS records, and I thought I heard CloudTrail.
Okay.
CloudTrail. So good. So we know what that is. Why do we have billing activity up here? Does guard duty look at billing activity? No, guard duty does not look at billing activity. However, there are billing alerts that will give you pretty much the exact same response if you have your Lambda set up correctly, right? So if we have a billing activity, what's going to happen? If suddenly we have a notification from Amazon saying, hey, you spent an extra $20 in a region that you don't typically work in, what's going on? Chances are somebody's doing something in a region you don't typically work in, and maybe you ought to respond to that, okay? We have threat intelligence up here. Who uses threat intelligence in their enterprise? A couple of us? Is threat intelligence helpful to you? Ish? Some people like it, some people don't. I enjoy it. I think it's a great thing. Guard Duty does have the ability to whitelist and use outside threat intelligence to evaluate things that are going on inside your environment. Partners do allow that, so it's kind of cool. AWS might actually reach out to you and say, hey, we've got this instance over here in your account that's like doing something inappropriate. You might want to do something about that. There's always that. And then we have ad hoc contact. That's where our security department gets a hold of you and goes, dude, not cool. Why do we do things in the cloud? Why do we do things this way? Is it easier to establish control in a data center or the cloud? I'm going to tell you that I think it's much, much easier to establish control in the cloud. Why? Because I can make a phone call and have it done, whereas in a data center, it might be very, very hard for me to figure out what's actually broken, because I don't have the logs unified, because I don't have the ability to find out what's actually happened in that data center easily. If someone's actually physically broken into the data center or any one of a number of other things, it may be a while, right? Whereas this, once I've defined the rule in CloudWatch, my whole incident response shrinks to nearly no time at all. Does that make sense? You've got a question on your face, ma'am. Okay. What's the difference between a data center and the cloud? And that's the part we're missing? Okay. So in the physical world, if we build a data center, right, and we have a parking lot, we have a gate guard, we have a nice gentleman, ma'am, in the bulletproof case that like lets you in and out of the data center, right? There are a lot of things that you have to do to get yourself down to that data center and into that data center to figure out what's going on, aren't there? I have to sit down at my laptop, open up the laptop, and log into AWS to immediately get into my cloud environment. So it's much, much faster if I go into the cloud, even if I'm doing it by hand, right? Now, if I'm automatically responding to an incident in a data center and I still have to go down there, there's extra time built into that. Maybe you don't. At some point, maybe you don't. But realistically, the point is, as we look at this, there's a lot of other things that are going to happen in that data center that require you to spin up new tools to utilize systems that are not ready, that you just simply don't have built into that data center realistically. And because we have it in the cloud, and you can just spin up elastically whatever you need at the moment for any incident that you want to do, anything that you can possibly imagine you want to do, you can just do it, as opposed to have to figure out how to build that in a data center and extra switches and servers and yada, 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 yada to get that done. Make sense? Kinda? Fair.
Kind of like my experience, been usually the procurement and scaling part of the physical data center.
Tends to be a problem. So the statement is procurement and getting it all ready is a problem. And it can be. So that's the intent behind this slide. Now, as we look at this, we kind of talked about this in the last talk. We've talked about infrastructure, which is decidedly your data center. And we've talked about your application. And these are the things that we generally talk about when we talk about incident response, right? We're pretty comfortable here. And we've just talked about a data center, which leads me to services, right? Services is decidedly the place where data centers are interesting, right? We talked about the gate guard in the last talk, right? He is decidedly my IAM service, as it were, right? The gate guard in a data center is a service. The individual in the kiosk that lets you into the data center itself is a service. Getting through the man trap is a service, right? Different things that data center provides you, the different things that the cloud provides you as a specific endpoint for multiple people to use is a service. So as we look at this, one of the things that I really like about the cloud is that I have the ability to log everything. Everything is logged. Everything goes to a central point, and I can automate the central point with the cloud. So it's all there, done. My services layer is protected. I have things like guard duty to protect that layer and to organize the different attack vectors from each layer into guard duty. So I know that someone came in on the infrastructure system and they started using a service that we don't typically use. I know that I had an application that was acting funny, and then it started trying to use a service that it's not allowed to use, right? And that's important stuff to be able to correlate. We talked about this in the last talk. What's the other here? Obviously, it's the human, right? The gate guard is the problem. The human is the problem. Humans in production shouldn't happen. I want to remove all of the humans I can. Go ahead, sir.
So I wanted to ask you about something you just mentioned.
Okay.
Obviously, right, every year we reinvent, the bunnies start multiplying again.
The bunnies start multiplying again? Oh, more and more services. All right, fair enough. You had me there for a minute, man. I had no idea where you were going.
So does guard duty or does some other element of AWS allow you to say, look, I only use EC2
X, right. So you can use IAM to control the access that your users have to different services. You can use organizations to push those SCPs down to other portions of your organization. or you can use third-party products like CloudTamer to actually evaluate whether or not your governance policy, whatever that happens to be in your enterprise, is pushed out to each of the subset accounts. So for instance, one of my favorite examples with CloudTamer is I have a HIPAA business over here in the same organization, and I've got a PCI business over here. And how do I manage both of them? And that's where sometimes like the third party like CloudTamer is really good at actually dealing with getting both of those needs met and evaluating whether those services are being followed in HIPAA or in PCI.
But what you just said is like, there are services that you don't normally use can have guard duty.
You can't have guard duty do that. No, you'd have to do a preventative control. And that goes back to, do we want to do a responsive or a preventative control? I'd rather do the preventative. That has to be a preventative control. You can write a responsive control on that one and actually look at the cloud trail as it's going by and evaluate whether, hey, look, we've got this service that you're not supposed to be using and you're using it. But I, as the incident responder, am going to look at you and go, why didn't you just turn it off in the IAM policy? Why does that user have the ability to use that service?
So it's something you write in Lambda, or
That's something that you would write in an IAM policy, specifically. Did I get there? Okay. So as we talk about this then, we're going to end up with the 3 application domains that we saw on the last slide deck, right? We're going to start talking about how to respond to these incidents from the application, the infrastructure, or the services domain. And I feel like this is a bit more repetitive than from the last talk, but I want to make sure that we pound this into your head. Does this make sense? You get that as you look at your Amazon account, as you look at your application, you're really looking at 3 different portions of a triangle, right? They're kind of connected and they're together, and you need to deal with them as a unit or you're going to have issues. So as we begin to look at types of incidents, there really are a number of types of incidents that we're going to see. Generally speaking, these types of incidents are going to cross. So if we have somebody turning on cryptocurrency mining, which types of incidents are going to be used in that particular event? Which variances are we going to have? Obviously, compliance variance, yeah? You shouldn't have cryptocurrency mining in your account. Unauthorized resources, decidedly. Excessive permissions. So here's the thing, and I'm going to be really, really honest with you. I dislike this list. I dislike this list because if you look at it, and you look at any incident that you can come up with, any incident is going to be a combination of sub-things, right? So if you've got cryptocurrency mining in your account, chances are you also have an account breach, right? Somebody launched that somehow. How'd they get there? So you start looking through this, and I think very quickly you start turning a lot of these boxes red. And I want to be very careful as we look at this. I would rather, I think, have you look at this and evaluate it on these 3 portions than on these, right? So if you have something that is specifically unauthorized access or a compliance variation, chances are it's over here in the services domain, right? Does that make sense to everybody? Go ahead.
I mean, the second slide is great with being able to just more granular.
It is more granular. You're right.
More coarse grain. And I mean, for the most part, we've been looking at saying, hey, listen, you can look at logs and so on and all those other 5 things and figure out what the problem is. The reality is that, most people find their databases out in the dark web and they have no idea how it got there. And they spend a good amount of time
Trying to figure that out. Yeah.
Is exposed.
So the response is that I really like the second list because it gives me more granularity, specifically when something really bad happens, like a database breach. I hear you. I think at that point, when we're actually doing the RCA, when we're actually looking at root cause analysis, this list comes into play a lot more because that helps us begin to look at how are we going to respond to this incident long term, right? How am I going to build out this preventative control? And at that point, then I think you're right. We had a compliance variance like we talked about in the last talk. Administrator Bob got in. We don't know how Administrator Bob got in. We really need to make it so Administrator Bob can't get in again, right? How did that happen? Let's go back to IAM and deal with that at the IAM level and remove Administrator Bob's ability to add ENIs to servers. He should be doing that through CloudFormation or doing it through the pipeline anyway, right? So that's a compliance variance probably to begin with, and maybe some excessive permissions. I like it from that point of view.
I mean, I'm looking at from that Marriott breach, right? And
Obviously, I won't comment on that.
Yeah, but I mean, if that happened, if they just found the freaking database out in the dark web, they didn't know whether it was encrypted, but
Right.
they don't know whether the keys were stolen or not.
We don't know what's going on, and out here it is. Right.
So, and that's probably what, I mean, or a smaller version of that is probably what most people deal with.
Well, I would call that more forensics, actually.
Okay, that's a great point, because that was my
Yeah.
next question. I mean,
What's the difference?
yeah, because forensics sounds like you're gathering evidence to report to law enforcement rather than trying to solve a problem, and or is it both?
So the statement is forensics sounds more like it's trying to get things for law enforcement. And I get it. I think the term is overused. I think we like to watch our police TV, and consequently everybody knows what forensics is. But the reality is that when we look at forensics and we look at how forensics is handled in a cloud or in an incident like this, it's different than the concept of forensics, at least in my opinion, that it's different than the concept of forensics when we talk about a police investigation. It may well be that you're doing forensics, you're looking at the leftover bits to figure out how I can make this not happen again. So for instance, if we had a Java app that had a 0 day in it, right? We haven't patched, maybe we've got a library we shouldn't be using, we've got something, take your pick, right? I'm going to do forensics on that library. I'm going to do forensics on that machine. I'm going to look at the logs. I'm going to evaluate how that happened. And then it's going to probably be a compliance variance, specifically in that scenario, right? I haven't patched my machine. Compliance says that we should have patched my machine. My RCA is going to say patch the machine, right? And to be fair, the action that I'm going to have in my RCA is going to be patch the machine. My finding is going to be we didn't patch the machine.
I mean, and a couple other questions along those lines. Like, for me, I'm also thinking with something like logs that you can have some kind of instant replay. I mean, equivalent to a sports analogy. And clearly, we're not there yet.
Yeah,
but, I mean,
yeah.
you should be able to do that, right? Because I mean, you have pretty much the audit trail of everything that happened, and you can put this in
So-
safe space and then have a replay.
Yeah.
What happened?
So the man's request is that we have an instant replay feature. I completely agree with you from the concept, and that's really where we get into the forensics account and how your legal team has decided they want to deal with that. That may actually be what you have in your forensics account. That might be a chunk of CloudTrail logs, as well as all of the data that went in and out of that machine. And at that point, then you can pseudo replay it, if you will, going through the logs. There are some SIMs out there that I believe give you that feature, but Amazon doesn't.
And then one other thing is, like, okay, now let's say I see an intruder in my system, or multiple intruders.
Bad things have happened.
Can I now still make them think that they're in the real system, but transfer?
So you want a honeypot. Okay.
So that, I mean, that's honeypot.
Yeah. So the very nice gentleman has asked, how do we honeypot? So who knows what honeypots are? A couple of us? Oh, a lot of us. Great. We've all seen hackers. So the concept of honeypotting is really, really old, and it makes a lot of sense when we get into it mentally and play the mental exercise. The reality is, as someone who's run honeypots before, it's exceptionally hard to keep someone's interest if they're a hacker and make them think that they're actually in the real system. So to get real threat intel out of a honeypot is kind of rare and hard to do. I would tell you that probably it's not worth your time. If you want to go for it, I'd ask you to go for it. I'd love to see the results.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what the different strategies are. I mean, we're looking at it this pretty high level. I mean,
Yeah.
You know, I want almost
No, that's fair.
level of strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we get into this and we start going down this organized approach concept, we get into strategies and how we want to handle things like this. And do we want to do a honeypot? And is this really where we want to go? I'm going to point out again, organized response. So just like in the last talk, no cowboys, no cowgirls, no heroes, right? This is an organized approach that should be running through your run book that you've had written down for a long time now, or at very least we'll be writing down here shortly about what you're going to do next. We're going to establish control, determine impact, recover as needed, and investigate root cause. If we talk about establish control, these are some of the things that we're going to talk about doing. Now, we just talked about how you do them. Does anybody have any questions about how do they want to establish control? If someone has taken control of your production account, what are you going to look for? What are you going to do? Can you log into the console? Yes? No? Maybe? hopefully. Who uses the root credentials to log into the console? I will point out for those on Twitch, the people are now laughing. We don't do that. Why not? If I log in with my root credentials and I use my root credentials all the time, does it make it easier for someone to take them? If someone takes my root credentials, who owns the account? Someone else. Is that what we want to have happen? No. So if you have to follow this concept and you have to deal with what happens if someone gets my root credentials, there is a process at Amazon to get that fixed. Don't worry about that. That is fixable. That said, I want you to be very clear about things. You should protect your root credentials as if they are the most important thing in your IT inventory of assets. Those go in a safe somewhere, they have MFA on them, and they're extremely important, okay? Can I log into instances? How do I log into instances on a day-to-day basis? Do I have SSH keys? Okay, I'm going to ask you why you're logging into instances at all. You should be using SSM from the command line, in my opinion. But that said, can I get in? Can I actually look at things? Generally, when we talk about a production account, you have a break glass account. You have a break glass user. You guys know what break glass users are? So it's a user and account that literally is sitting in a safe somewhere that has an MFA associated with it, that when something bad happens, lets me get into that account. And it might be something to the point where I actually have a USB sitting there too that has an SSH key that lets me get onto those servers and evaluate what's going on inside those servers. All of those things need to be pre-planned. If you're doing this morning of incident, do you think that this goes well? Establishing control can be the hardest thing that you can have to do in an incident. If you still have control, there's still a lot of things you can do. If you have to establish control, then you've got to wait for Amazon to help you. I would rather that you've prepped things appropriately. You have a production account that has root credentials in a safe somewhere, and you have a break glass account that is also in a safe somewhere else. Okay? Make sense? Determine impact. Is it a big deal or not? Do I care? If someone has breached a presentation layer server, you guys know what presentation layer is on an N-tier application? Something that is just showing HTML, something that is just showing JavaScript, something that just hosts static content effectively, like the Grinch app from yesterday. If we've got an S3 bucket that just has static content for us, do I care about anything there? Well, okay, maybe a little bit. Maybe I need to revert my content, right? Is the impact to that huge? No, it's not. I can click a button and revert the content. We're done. If, however, I have access issues where maybe someone's breached a database, maybe for a little bit, some administrator Bob went ahead and put the database server on the public internet, right? What's my data breach look like at that point? Is that a bigger impact than this? Right? As we write our run books that we talked about yesterday and we look at something like this, part of my response to this is going to be determining that impact. If I have a data breach, is the severity of this a 10? Probably. What do we do next? That is going to change the way that I look at the response for this incident, right? What else do I have to have if I'm going to determine impact? Do you want to go through all of your servers, thousands, as I remember many of us raised our hands and said just shortly ago, do I want to have to go through all of my servers and evaluate whether or not I have a breach on those servers? Probably not. I want to have instrumentation in my applications and in my servers to evaluate things prior to me actually having to go do it manually. So maybe this is where I have an SSM script that I can run on all my servers at the same time to evaluate whether or not their current configuration is appropriate for what they're doing. If we have one web server out of 200 that is misconfigured or has things running, different processes running, we can assume that maybe there's a problem there, and we might need to go deal with that one specifically. We can automatically remediate that system and remove the security group that's currently on it and put a different security on it, a security group on it that will keep it by itself, right? We can remove it from an ASG. We can do all sorts of things. Review billing. We talked about this a second ago. Why do we review billing? Because maybe somebody launched stuff in a different region. If you're not looking at all of your regions, maybe you ought to be. Recover as needed. So this is where legal comes in. If I'm removing instances that have specific data on them that I am not allowed to remove, maybe I have to keep those logs for some regulatory reason, I need to have spoken to legal before I get to this step, right? If I'm going to recover, I need to make sure that I'm recovering the right way before I do it. So do you remove users? It's a personal favorite, right? If we've got a production environment and I've got Administrator Bob, who I've known for 20 years, and things are beginning to act funny, is it okay for me to just delete Administrator Bob? So what's associated with users? Keys and secret keys. What do keys and secret keys do? They let CLI and programs get into my AWS account and do things. What happens if my systems are dependent on said Bob? Not a happy day. Okay? This is one of those moments where you need to figure out, as you're beginning to look at your incident response plan, which is kind of what we're doing here, do I have the ability to remove Bob? Do I have the ability to remove anybody? Have my developers use things that are specific users, and do those users have keys and secret keys that I need to deal with? To be fair, they shouldn't be doing that, right? They should be using something like parameter store to actually keep that information in, and they should have users that are specifically set aside for services, okay? Administrator Bob shouldn't use his personal account to build a response script. So one of the things that we do initially when we actually respond to an incident for our customers is to try to roll all of the initial usernames and passwords. So we will take everybody's username and we'll give them a new password. And that does two things. That will tell us if there's actually an issue, and it will tell us if somebody's actually going ahead and trying to log in and out. What's another place that you can do that with? There's a great little button on the bottom right that nobody ever uses. An IAM on the user screen. It's called credential report. We'll tell you when a user got created, the last time they logged in, and how many times they've actually had their CLI rolled. So it's a nice to have when you get to this level and you're responding and you've got to figure out, do we recover or do we burn a user? You can tell, hey, look, this user just got made. And oh yeah, look, we've got 3 more keys that got made today. That's probably not an okay thing. Now we know a little bit more about what's happened. Where else would we find that? All that information would be in CloudTrail. Okay, so now let's assume that everything's happy. We've gone ahead and we've redeployed. We've taken our CloudFormation, we've deployed to a new region. Everything is back up, life is peachy, and off we go, right? We're going to investigate root cause. How do we do that? To your question earlier, what is forensics, right? If I've recovered my account to a new account, let's say I've gone ahead and spun up a totally new production account. What do I do with the old account? Do I burn it? Do I keep it? How do I keep it? What do I do? Do I take off the payment methods so that people can't keep doing stuff to it if it's still breached? There's a whole bunch of questions that go into how did I recover that answer how do I get to a root cause analysis in this particular slide. And root cause analysis is really important, and I get that this is really kind of boring, but it's really kind of important because you need to make sure this doesn't happen again. So what's the second worst thing that can possibly ever happen to a SecOps life? Second worst thing. Calling the first time to the CEO and saying, hey, we've been breached. What's the first worst thing that can ever happen? The worst thing that can ever happen to a SecOp? Having to call the second time. You don't want to do that, right? You don't want to be there the second time. You've already been breached once. You know that you've been breached. You can tell how you've been breached. Fix it, right? So this is decidedly an eat your vegetables moment.
Well, actually, the worst thing is being breached and you don't know it.
Well, then you can't call the CEO. The joke isn't nearly that funny, though.
It's got to be worth it not knowing.
It turns out that ignorance is not bliss. All right. So as we go through our IR lifecycle, and you will get the slides from yesterday that does give you a RCA template that will help you go through some of this stuff and get to specific actions. As we talk about RCA, the thing that's the biggest issue here, the thing that you need to make sure that you maintain and monitor are the action items. So I get it that in an RCA, if we're all a company and you're the developer and you're the ops guy and you're the sec guy, what's going to happen? Right? Is that helpful to anybody? Does anything get solved if we all point to each other? Very nice young lady here is the developer, and she did a whole bunch of hard work, right? And the sec guy is just going to yell at her the whole time. It's all your fault, right? Because we've all been in that room. We've all had that happen. Don't do that. No blame RCAs. It happens. Everybody makes mistakes. It's cool, right? Just fix it so it doesn't happen again. Improve. Iterate, 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 iterate. Accept that it will happen again, accept that you will again make mistakes, and accept that the process will continue. Hopefully not nearly as badly as the first time. Cool? All right. So we talked about this a little bit yesterday. So I'm actually on our customers incident response team. I used to own the public sector side of it. That meant that I got to respond to public sector incidents on a weekly basis. It was lots of fun. I actually really enjoyed it, honestly. I'm kind of weird. But that said, as we look at something like this, the first thing I really want you to do is open a support case with AWS, right? I want you to open a support case with AWS because that's one of the most important things you can do, because we can help you through this type of thing. And if we know that we need to help you, we can. If we don't know that you're having a problem, we can't help you. So please open up a support case. Now, an interesting note here is that most of the incidents that occur with customers' data and customers in general get solved here. I don't even get to see them. Most of them get solved here because our tech support is so good. So please, give them a try. Preparation is key. You need to make sure that you have forensics AMIs, tools, whatever you need. You need to make sure that you've discussed with your C-level individuals, with your legal department, what you want to do. Is attribution important or not? Do I need to do forensics or not? Am I going to have a third-party company come in and look at my stuff or not? If these things are true, then we need to prepare differently. So who uses AMIs right now to do forensics? Not so much. Who uses SSM to do forensics? Not so much. These are the things that you need to prepare today so that when it does happen, you're ready to go. There are enough things on AWS Labs and in the little download I gave you that will help get you started, but it would be nice if you would continue to build those things out. There's a couple of really cool products out there. I'm blanking on one of them. Cloud. Shoot. I've gone and forgotten it. Apologies. We'll continue that if I remember it. There are, however, a number of other tools. Cloud Custodian, there we go, that will help you do some of that. There are a number of tools here that you can go ahead and use. One of the things that is not up here that I like to use is Scout 2. Scout 2 is a great thing that I will generally run on an incident to evaluate an account's security. It will give you a really good baseline as to what's going on and evaluate things that you probably need to fix now or specifically before the incident actually occurs. Now, we're done. We've completed our incident and we all go home, right? We never have to think about it again. It's never going to happen again. Is that right? So, yeah. In the concept of learning from what we've just had happen to us, I would urge you all to play SIRS. So who here is a security operative or an ops guy? A few of us? Are you guys ever like the hero, really? Like an incident happens and we all love the security guy for like 48 hours, right? Because the security happened and we fixed it. What's the next thing that happens? Hey, why did that happen? Dude, where did you screw up? Why did that? Huh? I thought you had this. So what's the issue there? For you, it's DevOps. So I would urge you to move to DevSecOps, and I'm sure that won't fix the problem. No, it really, the issue here is that we don't communicate. As SecOps, we don't tell people what's going on. We end up being the individual that sits in the back of the room and just makes sure everybody's safe. And I get that you're the guy on the wall and you're the one protecting everybody. But because you're the guy on the wall, you're not talking to everybody. And what security incident response simulations allow you to do is, frankly, to communicate up the chain. You can communicate to everyone everything that you do by allowing them to play a game, right? When we play a game, is it scary? Well, it depends on the game, I suppose. But generally speaking, no, right? If we play a game, my ego is out of it, especially if we go ahead and play a game on something that isn't my actual company. There's less ego in me. I might be competitive, I might really want to win, but it's not my whole persona isn't invested in losing, right? So I can lose and still learn something and not feel horrible about myself. So it's a wonderful way for us as security operatives to go out and communicate to the people that we work with what we do on a day-to-day basis. And if we do this quarterly, if we do this monthly, we can make this communication style really, really powerful. And we can let the people that are in the C-level above us understand what we do on a day-to-day basis and how we need help, right? If you can show someone in a C-level that we've got a problem this way, it's much less offensive than if you go say, hey, we got a problem. Especially if you don't have a solution in hand. So as we work backwards from our customer and take that last statement of we're actually communicating up the chain, we're looking at ways to validate readiness. We're looking at ways to make ourselves feel far more comfortable with these types of concepts. Does anybody do martial arts? A couple of us? So martial arts tends to be this concept, I'm going to do something 10,000 times, I'm going to do something 1,000 times, and I'm going to keep doing it because the more often I do it, the better at it I will get. This is the same concept. I am going to get my enterprise muscle memory on how to do incident response, and consequently, we will be far better prepared when it actually happens. Guess what else happens here? If I've communicated to my C-level that I have an issue for the last 6 months, and they've played SIRS and they've seen it fail, and then it actually happens, guess what's not going to happen 48 hours later? They're not going to look at you and go, how did it happen? They know how it happened. You've showed them for 6 months how it's happened. So everybody's a little bit more comfortable with the concept. Now we know we need to fix it. Thank you. We'll go ahead and fix it. So generally speaking, this is really easy to do. I gave you guys yesterday, and the download that was just before this has a runbook in it that has 48 wonderful issues in it that you can go ahead and simulate, and I would suggest that you chain them together, right? It's cool. So as you simulate these things through, you're going to find an issue that you specifically find interesting to your company. Who here runs PCI companies? Anybody? PCI? Okay. I think we're going to use that as an example then. I like the fact that no one's actually invested. As we talk about PCI data, maybe we have a PCI data breach. That means that we're going to have to make some notifications. That means we're going to have to start making sure that we have data collected. So as we deal with that, we're going to start looking at how we handle that data. That's going to be an issue of importance for my company. That's going to get people interested in what we're doing, right? The first time we do this, do we need to find security geeks? So this is a slide I disagree with. I don't think SIRS should necessarily be run by the security geeks. I think we can help you. I think we can kick off the process. I think we can get the team together to do it. I would urge you to have your developers run the SIRS. I would urge you to have your managers run the SIRS. I would urge you to have the legal run the SIRS. I would urge everybody to have everyone at your company run a SIRS. Why? Because it gets them invested in what's going on and they have to think through how to fix it. Build a realistic model. If you don't have an IoT system, probably don't need to test an IoT system. If you don't have PCI, don't test for PCI. Build a realistic system based on the architecture that you have. If you need help, you all have account representatives, account owners at AWS. We have SAs that can come out and talk to you. They can help you do that. Do you think that you ought to actually change production to run a SIRS? Do you think you should actually change production to run a SIRS? Let's go a la Simian Army. Let's go ahead and remove half your production environment to run a SIRS. So people actually do that. Netflix does that all the time. It's something you build to. It's not something you do the first time. It's not something you should expect your company to be able to do the first time. It is something that you can aspire to, but personally, I think it's a really bad idea. It's a really cool thing to talk about. It's a really cool thing to do if you're absolutely prepared for it and you know it's going to turn out okay. For the first 400 times before that, you really ought to be testing somewhere else. All right? Key elements, basic. I would suggest that you can test on your family. I know that's probably not appropriate. We don't like to test on family members, but the reality is, if you can talk to your kids about what's going to happen in the SIRS, chances are that your coworkers will understand it, especially if they're not technical. And if we are technical and we're running a SIRS, we really have to make sure that we're doing it in a non-technical way because there are people that are not technical that will be playing with us. Okay? So make sure you communicate to the right level and remove the technology gibberish out of the system. Then we do a live event. So if you ever do decide to play a SIRS in reality, a couple of things to note. We do have a form that you need to fill out. If you do start destroying actual production systems, it's a good idea. Do not violate the EULA, please. Not an okay thing to do. There is something to read there. Go ahead.
Somebody was telling me, because we haven't done this, but somebody was telling me that you actually have to be a root representative, not necessarily
The root.
an admin.
Yeah.
You have to be the root in order to pull this off.
So to turn in this form, you are required to log in as root.
Okay.
This is totally no joking around. We're going to log in as root. Now, you can't actually have, I believe there is a way to have your SA do it, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay. Good enough. Thank you.
Partners, we've seen that slide before. I think we're just about ready to wrap up here. So that's kind of two talks. We've talked about threat detection. We've talked about incident response. I've kind of bored the heck out of a bunch of you, I'm sure. I'm really sorry. I find this stuff really interesting. Do you guys have any questions? Anything that I can answer for you at this point? Either about either topic, frankly? Nothing? All right. We have anything from the Twitch feed? We're good? All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for, oh, no, we've got one question. You keep slipping in right at the end, man. Oh, okay. The biggest threat I see right now, frankly, is the Git repo post. I'm gonna like code my, so the typical scenario is I'm like the chief developer and I'm banging away on the keyboard and I solve something at 3 in the morning and I'm really, really tired and I do git post or I do git push right at the very end of my night and I go to bed and I don't realize that to get the whole thing to work, I've had to like hard code my key and secret key into the code. And then when I do that, I actually push it up to the Git repo. And then everybody has my Git keys. And then everybody uses my account for whatever they want to use my account for. And then I figure it out by the time I wake up in the morning. That's the, I kid you not, the most common issue. And that's where the Git secure, or Git secrets rather, comes into play. If you go to AWS Labs Git secrets, that will give you a little Git install that won't let that happen. It basically looks for that regex to remove it from the code. Anybody else?
Follow up to that. Does an AWS monitor Git pushes and
No.
public repo?
We couldn't. I mean, that doesn't really work that way.
Okay.
So the question is, does AWS monitor GitHub and all of that? No, we don't. All right. I'm going to take that as a we're out. I think I just got the hook. Talk to you guys later.